Joining us on Houston Sports Talk is a 42-year veteran of newspaper business in Houston. You've been in the Chronicle and the Post. This is Dale Robertson, and we're out at training camp. You've been to a few training camps over the years.
Well, let me preface the 42-year thing. I actually started in the business when I was 45. I mean, when I was 3, so I'm really only 45, folks, okay?
I've been reading you since I was 1, so that's good.
I really hate to hear that. Yeah, I've been to a couple. 76 in Huntsville, Texas was my first training camp. I have attended either entire training camps or parts of training camps every year since, except for, of course, those sad years when we had no football team.
What's the difference? I mean, how has it changed over the years? How have you seen it change?
Pretty much everything. The Bum Phillips training camps in San Angelo were about as loose and casual as could be. You needed to talk to a player, you just hung out in the dormitory. We actually slept in the same building as they did. You needed a guy, you waited after lunch, after dinner, you'd lounge on a couch, have a conversation. If I needed to talk to Bum, I just went over and banged on his door, and he'd open it and let me in. We'd sit there and watch film and film together and chit-chat. Let's just say it's a little more restrictive these days.
Well, one of the things you were telling me a few days ago was that Bum started camp in late June, and tell me a little bit about why he did that.
Well, Bum loved horses, and of course spent the last part of his life as a horseman, as a real cowboy. He showed horses, and he rode horses, trained horses, but he had a lot of horses back in the 70s, and San Angelo is pretty good horse country, so he would just load up the animals and get out there, in his trailer, and he'd try to get out there in mid-June, set up camp, and there were no restrictions under the collective bargaining agreement in those days. In fact, I'm not even sure there was a collective bargaining agreement in 1978 when they went to San Angelo, and that in his downtime he went out and played with his horses. So camp one year was 9, as I recall, 9 weeks long, and I actually had to leave camp to go meet my wife for 4th of July. Now we started on July 26th this year.
What's one of the crazier stories over the years that you can remember? Because there was always craziness going on with Glanville, and of course, Bum, it was less crazy but more fun, I guess.
Well, my two favorites, of course, unfortunately involve firearms. The OILERS, I'm going to say in maybe 79 or 80, had a camp picnic, and they had a big nose tackle by the name of Mike Stensrud, who went by the name of Mongo, which of course came from Blazing Saddles, and he had a bit of Mongo in him, and one night he did maybe perhaps had that one too many Lone Stars, and all of a sudden Mongo is firing wildly in all directions. Players ducking under cover, and actually I won't mention the names in this other incident, but in a Huntsville training camp, one teammate actually pulled a gun on another. I'm going to leave the names out of that, but you don't see that stuff anymore, which I think is good, actually. It's well. Here's a great story. The night before the last day of training camp in 1980, the OILERS had traded for Kenny Stabler with the Raiders and sent Dan Pastorini to the Raiders. Right? Bum was thinking, you can't beat them, join them. The Raiders were the one team that seemed capable of beating the Steelers back in the day. So he would subsequently acquire Dave Casper as well. Hall of Fame tight end. But anyway, so as I think everybody may remember Snake Stabler, but he was a bit of a wild child, as was Pastorini, but kind of in a different way. In fact, my favorite all-time Kenny Stabler's quote was, "About the only thing I really like to do is play football and drive around in my pickup truck sipping whiskey out of a paper cup." Okay, and he said, and I got several ex-wives that never figured that out. So that's Kenny Stabler. Anyway, so there's a nightclub there called Friends. And well, Snake made a lot of friends at Friends, and I recall seeing him face down in the parking lot at about 2 in the morning. So I go out to practice the next morning, and I might say at the time, this is probably interesting, that my bitter rival covering the OILERS was my dear friend and colleague today, John McClain. Well, John was packing up to go home and decided to skip the morning practice. Went out to practice and noticed that there was no Snake Stabler on the field anywhere. So afterwards, I sidled up to Bum. I was the only Now, think about this. I was the only reporter at that practice. There was no electronic media. John was back in his room. It was just me. And I said, "Bum, what's up with Snake?" "He's sick. He's a little under the weather." I said, "Is this the kind of sick that's probably going to cost him a fine?" Bum said, "Yep." So yeah, it's changed. It's a different world.
Can you imagine Facebook or Twitter during that time? It's not even possible.
We talk about that all the time. Yeah, no, I mean it's a whole different world. And I have to tell you though, Snake Stabler, he couldn't have cared less though. Made no difference. Made no difference to him. He could have been tweeted and Facebook till the cows came home, and he'd still do what he did.
Well, the characters have sure changed over the years. Bill O'Brien and this administration with the Texans will catch up to today. And is there anybody that he reminds you of the coaches, the Oilers coaches that you've covered in the past, or is this just totally different than anything that you've seen so far?
He's a very different guy. He's probably the most business-like coach I've been around. Frankly, if you had to draw a parallel, personality is not the same, but a bit like Jeff Fisher, which is a pretty good parallel to have. Jeff was a very young guy himself when he became head coach, even a little bit younger than Bill is. But Jeff was very businesslike himself. But of course, Jeff had coached in the NFL and played in the NFL for a number of years, so he came to it from a different place than Bill O'Brien. But that's a parallel, yeah.
Well, a lot of Houston people, I think, they have thoughts of Earl Campbell being the greatest Houston professional football player. But where is Andre Johnson coming in as we get towards the end of his career, the last few years here? Do you think when it's all said and done, he might end up being the guy that is the kind of the landmark for Houston pro football players?
Well, about 80% of the clever things that I know came from Bum Phillips, and he said a great thing about Earl, and I'll say exactly the same thing about Andre. When he was asked, is Earl at the top of his class? And Bum said, well, I don't know about that, but it don't take long to call his name. And that's Andre Johnson. I mean, he's you could only imagine what the career Andre would have had he played his entire career with, Tier 1 quarterbacks instead of David Carr and Matt Schaub. And I'm not demeaning either of them specifically, but I think everybody knows what I'm saying here. Imagine if Andre had spent his career with Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Drew Brees. I mean, his numbers would be ridiculous. Now they're just phenomenal. So, and he's a great guy. I know a lot of people got mad at him for what happened over this past offseason, but ultimately Andre showed up on time, and he didn't come in with an attitude. He came in and said, okay, I made my statement, that's how I felt. Here I'm here. I believe in the team. I believe in the coach. I'm here. So, and I thought that spoke volumes. And rarely do I defend a player who, is under contract and is maybe not doing what he's supposed to be doing. But in Andre's case, I gave him a pass because I think that whole deal could have been settled, in a much more private and quiet way before it ever became an issue. But bottom line is he came in. Now the bad news, 2 days into camp, he pulls a hamstring, so he might as well not be here. But at least he's not here because he's mad. Not here because he's mad.
Well, Andre, a quiet guy. He's not as fan friendly maybe as a guy like J.J. Watt, and I want to get your thoughts on this because the Oilers back in the day, they were great with the fans, but have you seen anybody quite like J.J. Watt that is out there with the fans and seems to interact with them and have as much fun as he's having right now?
Well, and the great thing about J.J. is first thing he'll tell you is if I'm not a great football player, nobody wants to interact with me. So he takes care of the great football player part, and then is fan friendly. And I've covered guys that were like J.J. I can say unequivocally, I've never covered a guy as good as him who is also like J.J. I've certainly covered other great defensive players, and Elvin Bethea, but Elvin was kind of a grumpy old man even when he was 25 years old, so he wasn't a big fan guy, but wonderful player. J.J. is the best combination of talent and charisma that I've probably been around in the NFL.
What about this year? What are you looking at from this team? What's going to need to happen what's going to need to go right for them?
Well, it's going to all boil down to injuries to key people. What we've seen so far in training camp is exactly all the wrong guys getting hurt except for J.J., and I probably shouldn't say that because he's probably going down right about now. I mean, if Arian Foster isn't 100% Arian Foster, both physically and mentally, and Andre's not 100% of what he's been the last 2 seasons when he's had 100 catch years, they're going to struggle. I think the defense, if Jadeveon Clowney is healthy, and he's practicing today, that's good news. So he can make a defense that 2 years ago was close to being great, almost back to being great. Last year was just an aberration. It was just a complete, perfect storm of everything could go wrong, would go wrong. They weren't a 2-14 team. The previous team probably wasn't a 12-4 team, but this team will finish somewhere, in my opinion, between 10-6 and 9-7. 9-7 can win them the division, but everything has to break right. The right guys have to stay healthy.
Well, that's 42-year riding veteran, and amazingly, he's only 29 years old. Dale Robertson, thanks for joining us,
My
Dale.
pleasure.
You can listen to more of our interviews and podcast on HoustonSportsTalk.net. Subscribe to Houston Sports Talk for free on iTunes or on the Stitcher app.